What is something more traumatizing than people realize? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Police injustice. I was assaulted in January 24. Made a police report when I got to the hospital and told them exactly where to go to find the guy. They never even went by the scene. Tried to get an internal investigation opened, but each officer covered for the other. Texas Rangers wouldn't get involved without referral from the police department. Ended up costing me $11,000 in medical dental procedures, and I had no real grounds for litigation without an arrest police contact with the assailant. The physical damage was one thing, but the mental side has been the hardest to get over. Story 2. Having a parent literally never take an interest into your interests. You're fed, clothed, housed, and educated, but anything beyond that is not perceived. It deprives you of a sense of self-expression. As an adult, you'll either be hollow of anything or desperately clinging to what you think makes your identity. Story 3. Being traumatized by the medical system, especially as a disabled person, and especially as a teenager. It's extremely difficult because you can't avoid the medical system. As a disabled person, you are forced to continue to engage with the system that has repeatedly traumatized you. It's essentially like being trapped in an abusive relationship, but you quite literally can't leave unless you want to forgo all medical treatment and die, which of course is something that some of us do consider an attempt, which leads us back to being hospitalized and back in the system. Vicious cycle. I honestly don't see this spoken about very much at all. Edit. Oof. I appreciate the upvotes, but I'm also so sad that so many people relate to this comment. I really hope you all can find that one medical professional who takes you seriously and listens to your concerns. They are out there. It's unfortunate that it's a luck of the draw, and it can take so long to find someone who listens. Best of health to everyone. You're all valid and deserve to be listened to by the people you go to for help. Story 4. Because I have autism, there's been a lot of times growing up when people told me I was overreacting to stuff that was bothering me, or even laughed directly at me because I asked a question I didn't think was weird. It leads to big self-esteem problems. I've even had days in high school where I was too stressed to operate, and my brain is telling me, oh, you're just faking it so you can be lazy. I've even had people tell me they have the exact same problem, and it's so hard to get over. Story 5. Alcoholism. TV portrays some of it, but really, unless you live in it, you didn't truly know. And yes, it's different than drug addiction. It permeates everything. It can be hidden from casual observers. Outsiders may never even know what's happening. Story 6. The ER waiting room. Normal wait time is 5 to 7 hours. During COVID, I waited 17 hours for a tube change. It's just constant waiting. Pain, stress, blood, vomit. Someone actually dying right next to you. Sometimes people can't handle it. Literally, they start yelling and screaming and demanding to be taken into the hospital, but they are on the list. Story 7. Being cheated on. You hear in movies, you console your friends, but only when you actually get cheated, you will know how bad it is. It literally makes you question everything. At what point did your relationship break? How come the person you loved and trusted did this? Were you not good enough? Story 8. Whenever you bring up a problem to someone close to you, big or small, they turn it around and make it about how you are the problem, completely ignoring what you brought up in the first place. Makes you never bring up issues again because you get ignored or you get argued into submission and learn to shut up and bottle it in. Story 9. You will outgrow your friends and loved ones, and there will be times you can't save them from themselves because they'll push you away and double down on digging their own graves in front of you. The only thing you can do is either watch silently or move on and hope your brain doesn't revive them in thoughts and dreams. Story 10. Deportation. I'm not talking about the recent excesses either. Deportation typically results in deracination, stripping someone from their community, friends, job, home, and family all at once. Our society has recognized exile of citizens to be cruel and unusual punishment, even for violent crimes. Deportation often has the same effects. Story 1. Parents who screamed in their kids' faces, who then turn around and tell their kids right to their faces they have to go into the other room to stop themselves from beating on them, then stonewall for days. Or parents who grab their kids and literally shake them to talk sense into them, then claim they're not abusive because they never hit them. Story 1-2. For all the comments regarding parental issues that happened in childhood, there is an incredible resource on YouTube to help heal from this kind of trauma. Search for Tim Fletcher Complex Trauma. This info has been an absolute life changer for me. Story 1-3. Intestinal disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. We are taught so much shame around toileting, and having a disease like these leaves individuals alone and seeped in trauma from the symptoms while also isolated by the shame. Story 1-4. Purity culture. I didn't look at my own body naked from 18 years old. The guilt and hang-ups about even now that I'm married are insane. I was fully bought into the culture too. You don't have to be resistant to it to still be wildly negatively impacted by it. Story 1-5. Constantly getting mixed signals as a kid and never really knowing what adults around you wanted from you. When I was a kid, I would get screamed at constantly for making too much noise, being in the way. Really just being a kid in general was something I wasn't supposed to do apparently. But I'd also get screamed at for pouting when I went and sat somewhere by myself. I still to this day don't understand what the adults in my life wanted from me. Story 1-6. Having a miscarriage. The physical pain is unreal. I thought I was going to pass out from the agony, which is traumatizing enough, but then the emotional pain takes a lot out of you too. People don't really talk about how traumatic it truly is. Story 1-7. Childhood bullying. Some people act like it's just a normal part of childhood, a challenge that all children need to experience to grow up strong. I've even seen comments online that we need to bring back bullying because kids these days are too soft. It's absurd. A bullied child is an abused child. They become socially stunted adults because the social skills they were supposed to learn as children were never developed because of the bullying. You'll have someone who is full of rage and always in defense, or you have someone who is too timid and terrified. Story 1-8. Emotional neglect by parents. Not feeling loved as a child, not being noticed unless you're in trouble. It's all very isolating and you end up withdrawn and unable to express or feel your emotions later in life. Story 1-9. Being around Christians who believe in seeing visions, speaking in tongues, and supernaturals. The way you cannot make a decision in life without them telling you they saw a vision from God, and you will then feel guilty of doing things, being with someone non-Christian, pursuing your own dreams. Story 20. Being broke or living paycheck to paycheck, where your paycheck doesn't quite make ends meet. You make too much for anyone to help, but not enough to survive without bill collectors harassing you. Literally just working to survive. Story 21. Having severely mentally handicapped children. It's a never-ending 24/7 until you die job. They can be some of the happiest people you'll ever meet, but raising a child for 40+ years is a new level of exhausting. Story 22. Getting fired. Not only are our jobs financial stability, which is obviously tied to food, housing, and other basic needs, they can be our main source of socialization, sense of purpose, and a way to structure the day. Story 23. Might be niche, but my mother never believed me when I said I was sick. She would always inspect my vomit and then claim it wasn't the sick kind of vomit. She didn't believe my fevers unless she saw them for herself, and even then she would barely acknowledge them as evidence of an illness. She never believed me until we would go to the doctors, usually 4-7 days after I became sick, and then they would diagnose me with something serious, in which case I would get no apology or validation. I now never believe my problems are real or serious and neglect taking care of myself properly. I think being medically gaslighted, not just by doctors, as others are saying, but by parents as well, is a trauma that goes unnoticed. Story 24. Not being listened to in childhood. Feeling perpetually disregarded by my family since childhood has definitely affected my ability to communicate on an emotional level. I really struggle to show and process emotions, especially in a romantic situation. Vulnerability is my greatest fear. Story 25. I am a very strong advocate for getting your child a pet before they grow up and leave home. Getting your first pet in your 40s and experiencing caring for something so much while also being able to afford any care necessary also has the flip side of being incredibly debilitating and painful when you finally have to deal with your first loss. As an adult, you're not prepared for this. In youth, you have others around you that have been through it, and talking freely, blubbering, and being emotional is accepted, encouraged, and understood. Being a man is hard enough when feelings are involved, but when you're a grown man that keeps it together from 9 to 5, you dread coming home from work Because as soon as the door closes behind you, you're just a little boy confused and falling apart because there is nothing but silence greeting you and the knowledge that you're just going to have to deal with it on your own. Story 26. Emotional neglect. It's not always obvious, but it hits deep. Growing up feeling ignored or like your feelings didn't matter can stick with you for years. It messes with your confidence and how you connect with others, even if no one else sees it. Story 27. IDK how to word it, but kind of always listening to your parents. I was the best child to my parents compared to my siblings. But then I grew up as a waiter or a perfect associate for upper managers. I had to really pause and realize being a really good listener and an okay mom traumatized me. It made me only want to finish small goals for others. Story 28. Just people dying. You never forget it. Everyone has it happen to them, and it happens more and more as you get older. It is the weight that gets heavier without you doing anything but care about someone. Even if not knowing, that one is the worst. It is a silent trauma we all share, but don't talk about. Story 29. Are we using the actual definition of traumatizing? Something so bad happening that it actually changes something about your life for the worst. Or the social media definition, something mildly inconvenient happened, and now I'm a little peeved. Story 30. Finding out your family is racist by being cut off for an interracial relationship. Truly had no idea my family was this way, and when I questioned it was told, we have no problem with them, but the races don't need to mix, was promptly ostracized from the family after that. It makes you rethink your entire childhood and all the people you used to look up to. Even those in the extended family that didn't agree, they let it happen and never said a word, so they are just as bad. It changed my view of every person in family overnight, and there is no going back. Story 31. Religious trauma. I grew up in a fundamentalist religious cult. I was inundated with stories of violent, bloody Armageddon. It was even in the children's storybooks. Illustrations of bloody conflict, fire raining down, and people shrieking in terror. I was also treated like for being different, for not having a dad in the picture, etc. I left when I was a teenager, but I missed out on a lot of social and life skills. It took me years to develop them, and I still don't really have a lot of deep friend relationships. I also spent years looking out the window, thinking one day I'd see fire raining from the sky and people fleeing in bloody terror. I'm good now, but boy, that was a lot to work through. Hell, my family was always super close, and I basically lost half of it. Any contact I had with them was pity, guilting, and emotional manipulation aimed at trying to get me back. I can't imagine what people who get out much later go through. Story 32. Being an older adopted child. One day I had a family, and the next the state took me and my siblings away. Then I bounced around group homes, foster homes, and institutions until I was adopted at 8. Everyone expected me to be happy and grateful that I was adopted and have no trauma over it, because I got a family unlike most of the other kids in the group home, but it never really felt like a family. It just felt like at 8 I was placed in a stranger's home and raised by them. It never did, and never will, feel like home. Story 33. Having a parent who is alive who comes in and out of your life and never acted like a parent. It was painful to grow up seeing my friends with 2 loving parents. I just don't understand how some parents can choose partying and over knowing their child. Now that I am a mom, I can't even imagine coming in and out of his life like that. Story 34. Teaching religion to children. It is an absolutely nightmarish violation of their autonomy before they are ready to comprehend such things and make their own decisions. Priming them for magical thinking is in and of itself a very bad choice, but it's especially vile to attach shame, guilt, and self-loathing for simply following our natural instincts to participate in completely consensual loving acts that are not harmful to anyone. Religion is a psychological torture ideology that few people are willing to reckon with the malice behind it. Story 35. Working at 911. I was a dispatcher for 6 years. It was the most rewarding and also stressful job I've ever had. Anything you've ever seen or heard about it is almost certainly bullshit, especially that stupid show. We didn't just sit around and talk on the phone all day. We aren't just a voice on the other end of the phone. We're people just trying to do our best with, usually, extremely limited resources. We are regularly, almost conveniently forgotten about. Most people don't even consider us first responders, even though we're usually the literal first person you talk to in an emergency. And nobody ever throws us any parades or pats us on the back. We're also sickeningly underpaid compared to every other emergency service. Across the board, I started at 12 hour and left at 17, but usually one of the first to get blamed for anything going wrong by the other services. I've had a woman asked to order a pizza through tears after being beaten by her husband. I've helped people perform CPR on an unresponsive stranger, walked coworkers through tying a tourniquet on a man whose arm was stuck in a machine, and dealt with the same old woman calling in every goddamn week to complain about kids messing with her property with literally zero evidence of it ever happening. And every 4th of July or New Year's, while you enjoy time with your family, we're taking complaint calls about fireworks. I remember almost every death, and especially the one family called in, and I talked to every one of them. The dad, mom, finally their teenage son, who could just barely stop crying enough to explain his younger sister had hung herself in the closet while they were gone out to eat for just a little while. Or the middle-aged man that called in, gave us his name and address before politely asking, "Please get here before my family does," then shooting himself in the head while still on the phone with my coworker. About a year into working that job, one of our local museums had a first responders weekend where you could get in for free. I walked up to the desk with my wife and kids and said I worked for 911. The girl at the counter said, and I quote, "Oh, that's not on my list of first responders," so she went and got her manager. I had to pay to get in. That was a nice experience. And if you read all this and think, wow, well, you must get good benefits or retirement or at least therapy, right? Nope. Therapy was your coworker calling out after working 9 or 12 or 16 days straight of 12-hour shifts during COVID because you're understaffed, underfunded, and underworked. So they call you in after they call the on-call and backup on-call, who have both also called out but really, really need you to work. So you go in with probably 4 or 5 hours of sleep, drink a bunch of coffee and monsters, and proceed to deal with all the world's problems but your own while you miss every important milestone in your kids' lives. Every birthday and anniversary, cancel any plans with friends and family to the point they just stop inviting you, and your marriage speed runs falling apart. Because even when you're home, you're either sleeping, wanting to sleep, or completely emotionally unavailable from untreated PTSD. So, yeah, that's why I don't do that anymore. Story 36. Autoimmune diseases. They're so difficult to get diagnosed, and doctors often don't believe you when you tell them your symptoms. Then dealing with the fact that your body is literally attacking itself just because. Then every little medical issue that crosses your mind could actually be a thing for you because you've already had bad things happen before. Plus, a lot of meds can cause serious side effects, so keeping an eye out for those is stressful AF. Story 37. Struggling with infertility, IVF, hormonal changes, all the emotional struggles when you realize you'll never have a family, and the random things that trigger or intensify these feelings. A lot of times it makes you feel like damaged goods, even though you aren't, and still expected to show up and be happy for all the people in your life who are having babies, while most of them won't acknowledge how challenging it is to learn you have no chance of ever having children. Story 38. Being treated as much younger than you are. I have ASD2, autism with substantial support needs, so I need a lot of assistance in day-to-day life, and I can only work part-time. I realized the other day just how used I am to being buddy in an environment where everybody else is sir or ma'am. It doesn't even faze me. I'm 32. I have never been anything but buddy. Why would it bother me now? But I have realized since then that it changes the way I think about myself. It changes the respect I have for myself. It makes me think of myself as less than, as the other. Will I say anything about it? Probably not. It has taken a miracle for me to work myself into a position where people are actually glad that I'm there. For the first time in my life, I don't want to risk losing that. But it is painful now that I have truly taken notice of it. Story 39, losing a sibling. On top of the typical grief one might expect, it completely changed your family dynamics forever. It's also like losing a part of you. It is so much worse than you'd expect. I remember a coworker's sister died when I was in my 20s, and she was early 40s. This coworker was generally kind of emotional, so I chalked it up to that, but she was completely changed, just gutted, and could not focus on anything else ever. I thought it was a little overdramatic. Then I lost my sister after an 18-month cancer battle. Man, it is terrible. I will never be the same person. Also, the impacts of suppressing stress and sadness during the illness. I thought I was just getting sick over and over again, the entirety of my sister's illness. But no, it was definitely the physical manifestation of my grief and stress. It's been 2 years, and I am still struggling to tell the difference between anxiety-induced feelings of illness and true illness. Story 40. Feeling the need to take on other people's burdens and actively help them heal just because your life is going well, better by comparison. People will selfishly use you as a free therapist and an emotional dumping ground if you aren't comfortable setting boundaries. The mindset of, I only have value if I'm actively adding value to someone else's life, is draining and scary. Just because someone has it worse than you do in life doesn't mean you always have to listen, stay late, help them rebuild, take time out of your life, come in on your days off, and stretch yourself thin all because it's the right thing to do. Being of the caretaker type comes with its own set of challenges that the outside world and we ourselves are often all too happy to ignore or sweep under the rug. Story 41. Not having any privacy in your parents' house. It's especially bad when the parents are toxic, which they usually are if they don't give privacy. So it's like the entire house there isn't one safe space you can be, and you think your room is a safe space even though it's only a little better than the rest. Story 42. Abuse by a therapist doesn't have to be. Any crossing of boundaries, manipulation, or gaslighting, emotional abuse can have disastrous effects on your mental health. No one goes to see a therapist thinking they will be harmed. The harm an unethical therapist can do to a vulnerable client is too often underestimated. Sri Tonan. Story 43. The loss of a pet. If people don't own pets, they severely underestimate the utter grief a pet owner feels when they lose their pet. I lost my dog 2 weeks ago, and I've been basically curled up in bed with his blanket for 2 weeks. I feel empty and broken. There is no one else in my life that loved me as unconditionally, that protected me with such ferocity, that believed I was a good person, even if I wasn't. I miss him every time I come home to an empty apartment. When I wake up in the morning and he's not next to me, at night when I usually take him for a long walk, when I go to the bathroom and he doesn't follow me in there because he loved to be with me. I was cooking the other day and a piece of zucchini fell on the floor, and I didn't pick it up until I realized he wasn't there to eat the scraps I dropped anymore. I fell on the floor sobbing. It's a different kind of grief from when I lose a family or friend because I was never mad at him, never argued with him. He never hurt me. His love was 100% pure. Story 44. Being emotionally ignored or dismissed by a parent, especially in the younger years. My mom always tells this story about when I was a toddler and I would throw a fit and cry, and she would just step over me and ignore me. Then I would get up and throw myself in front of her and cry again. Thinking about that made me realize why I am hesitant to share or tell my parents anything in my life at all, or why it is difficult for me to be emotionally vulnerable with anyone. Also probably why I had huge attention-seeking issues and emotional regulation problems growing up. They needed to take those moments to teach me how to process my feelings or comfort me, but they just ignored me instead or told me my feelings weren't that big of a deal and I should stop crying. Kind of fucks you up as a kid. Story 45. Infertility. Not being able to control when, if you have kids, seeing everyone else have babies and wondering why you can't. Getting your period every month, endless pregnancy tests, maybe a miscarriage or two in the process. Also, the treatments are super expensive. Story 46. The whole, I put a roof over your head. I brought you into this world. I can take you out. I'll give you something to cry about spill. I think it subconsciously made me feel that I'm not even worth the bare minimum of any of the hierarchy of needs unless I'm worthy of it in the eyes of the person who made me hate myself when I loved them unconditionally and they were supposed to be the one safe place in the world for me. A stranger could love me better. Story 47. Working a job. What classes as is all relative, but it can be the work itself, the environment, the management, the co-workers, how you were treated, etc. But being forced to go in and out day after day to be worn down and miserable will stick with you for years. Story 48. Realizing that so many things on my life were due to trauma. I've had a lifelong love of reading, was told it was actually a dissection process to block out the chaos in the home as a child. My saying I'm not an anxious person all my life, and realizing that Elle was a walking bundle of nerves since age 6. I'm nearly 65, and these recent revelations have really messed with my sense of self. Story 49. Parents that are autistic but not diagnosed. My parents are both 100% on the spectrum in some way. They grew up in an age where that just wasn't a thing, and they don't realize it. My dad will hyper-fixate on tasks and hobbies, then suddenly drop them entirely. He likes for things to be done an exact way, and those things not being done in that exact way will send him into an inconsolable rage. He's always been terrible with social cues, and I've watched as he's applied the exact same techniques to people over and over again and come out being the charming one because he's found what works for him. My mom, on the other hand, cannot get interested in anything other than books. Getting her to try something new is like pulling teeth. She has a few comfort foods that she likes to eat, and she begrudgingly sits through everything else. She's got a boatload of personality issues, from actual OCD to narcissism, but she absolutely could never realize how that affects the people around her. I've tried hinting to them that they're both on the spectrum, but they think I'm crazy. In the meantime, I just try to acknowledge and handle my own symptoms, behaviors, and come out of it all sane. Story 50. Losing a friend even though they are alive. I actually think it's more painful than breaking up with a partner. Bonus points if you still have to see and face each other every day in whatever capacity, university, work, friendship group, etc. Lost a friend a few years ago, and it's still very painful. I've had some pretty awful breakups, but this is a different kind of pain. Story 51. Losing your hair during chemo. I mean, everyone assumes it probably sucks, and I was prepared. But I told myself it's just hair and it grows back. Yeah, nothing could have prepared me for the visceral reaction of pulling clumps of hair from my head, cleaning tons of hair off my pillow daily, pulling it out while showering, etc. The feel of my mostly bald head was jarring, and then when it started growing back in, it was curly and coarse in 3 different colors, LOL. Funny enough, once I was mostly bald, the trauma was sorta over. I didn't shave it to the skin BC. I was told you can get ingrown hairs that way. Plus, a very thin layer of hair felt good on the pillow. I wore pretty headscarves. I got a bunch of silky ones with gorgeous patterns. Silver linings, I suppose. Luckily, I had an anaphylactic reaction to the exact med that causes your hair to fall out and never will get it again. Not all chemo meds make your hair fall out, but the annoying thing is that I had to go through all that for what ended up being only 1 infusion of that specific med. I was supposed to have 3-4. Anyway, yeah, it sucks. But life goes on. Story 52. One thing that's often more traumatizing than people realize is emotional neglect in childhood. Unlike overt abuse, it's invisible and harder to recognize. Yet it can deeply affect a person's self-worth, ability to regulate emotions, and form healthy relationships later in life. Because there's often no event to point to, many people dismiss their pain, but the long-term impact can be profound. Story 53. Having a single narcissist parent. When you only have one parental figure in life growing up, you don't realize how horrible they are. You grow up thinking your childhood is normal. You do not have others to view as parental figures. And if you do, you don't get to be around them enough to realize right away how not good your parent actually is. You spend your childhood feeling unwanted, unloved, not good enough, and told it is all your fault, hated from day one. You spend your time being a people pleaser and hiding yourself because you aren't worthy of having your own opinions, and it's not worth the fight that will ensue. You spend years and years like this, always feeling wrong, always feeling like something is not right, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. You don't have another adult to look up to. All you know is that parent. Until eventually you realize you're not crazy, at least not the way your parent made it seem, and that they were an abusive piece of that degraded you at every chance and hated you so much that you cannot even fathom being able to love yourself. Then you realize how crazy you actually are, because your childhood was not normal. There might not have been bruises all the time, but your mind has been shattered over and over. You finally realize this was all cause of parent. They won't listen to you, respect you, or try to change anything, so you cut them off. Then the rest of the family thinks you're evil, cause she's your mom. So you lose your only parent, not that you had them to begin with. You lose your family. You're stuck wondering why you are so hated and what you did was so bad and awful that you don't deserve any love. You eventually realize how messed up your brain is and not normal. You try to heal, to rewire your brain and feel worthy. But it's an everyday battle and everyday war. Even years later, the scars still burn. Story 54, circumcisions. It can cause PTSD. They don't anesthetize the baby. They just strap it down to a table and cut its dick. It serves no function other than aesthetics, or obviously there's the religious function. If it's not for religion, you're just worried about what a baby's dick looks like, which is fucking weird. Story 55. Being falsely accused of SA, I had a woman, who I had literally never been outside of a public setting with, accused me within our mutual friends group. This was in the middle of the Me Too movement, so everyone instantly sided with her, despite the fact that her story made no sense. Well, I ended up totally severing ties with that entire part of my life and moving on. A few years later, one of my old friends called me up and said they wanted to set the record straight. Turns out everyone started figuring it out after about the third time that she was supposedly SA'd. And when they started pressing her, she finally admitted she made it all up for the drama. This was a group of friends within the kink community, which my wife and I used to be very active in. Since then, we've closed our Fed accounts and totally removed ourselves from that entire community. Even thinking about going to an event again sends me into a mild panic attack. Story 56. Having your parent comment on everything you eat, how much of it you eat, and how fast you eat it. My mom went through my fridge once and looked at the ingredients on every single thing. She pulled out a salad dressing and smugly informed me it had high fructose corn syrup. Another time I mentioned what I usually have for lunch, hummus and carrots being part of it. She scoffed and said it's so easy to overeat hummus. I said, well, that's why I follow the serving size of 2 tablespoons. Once I had a birthday party and I was casually eating fruit with my friends and just having a good time. My mom smacked my hand away and told me to stop grazing. You know, a thing cows do. No one will see this comment, but it felt kind of good to rant. My food trauma sucks. Story 57. Being ignored. When I tell people I hated high school, they assumed I was bullied, but I was just ignored, which is IMO worse in many ways. I'm 34 now and have worked hard to build back my confidence and self-esteem, but it has left lasting effects on me. Story 58. Getting fired. It could be entirely due to the insanity of a megalomaniac employer, but you still question your own competency. It can take years to move past, even after you've reaffirmed your skills and value at another job. Suing them for wrongful dismissal can help validate your side, but ultimately it's up to you to move on. Story 59. Having no one believe, listen to you when you speak out against someone. My parents used to do it when I'd tell them my grandma was going out of her way to with me. They'd only focus on how I reacted to her messing with me and punish me for disrespecting an adult. I'd tell them she lied about what she actually did and was making her actions seem less severe than it was. They always believed her, and they never stopped her or told her to leave me alone. A few years ago, my sister tells me that woman used to nudge her and say, "Watch this," before she would go over and with me. Till this day, my parents tell me I need to let it go and move on since she's been dead 20 years. Was being sexually harassed a few years ago, and I was telling my coworkers about it. When they started noticing, they asked, and I told them in detail what was going on. When I finally reported the fucker, the admin staff believed the lie he told about me, and then the mediator defended him and told me what he did was not harassment. But I don't think a lot of people realize how alone and defeated you feel during that time. Edit removed one part just in case someone from work sees his post. Story 60. Getting fired or laid off. It's terrifying. You second-guess yourself. You wonder about your own self-worth. My mother died of dementia. That was awful. I was poor. The bone-deep fear never left me. I was bullied as a child. It shaped my personality. I was unprepared for the shame and upheaval of losing my job. Story 61. Childhood emotional neglect. It's invisible from the outside. It can look like a well-taken care of and loved child. The kid won't even realize something is that wrong because it's not exactly something bad happening. It's instead the absence of the emotional care a kid needs to develop properly, and they have no reference for what's normal. But it causes a severely traumatized and broken adult with no ability to form normal relationships or be kind to themselves. Story 62. Having my 32-year-old brother murdered in my house, and then a year later giving birth to my son at 38 weeks, who was stillborn. It's been 3 years since my brother was killed, and almost 2 since my son died, and people just think I'm fine and I've moved on. The trauma never goes away. Story 63. Being poor. When I was younger, I lived out of food banks and worked 4 terrible jobs and walked home from work across town at 3 a.m. for years just to barely stay off the street. I fought my way through it and got lucky and landed in a professional space, but I've spent my whole adult life terrified of losing it all and having to spend every day being terrified about where my next meal would come from or if I'd have a place to live. It sticks with you, man. Story 64. Having an overprotective mom who yells when she can't control a situation. I, 31F, love her to death and we have a great relationship. But even though I'm the oldest, my siblings are able to do things. I can't travel and go have fun. I have cerebral palsy and a shunt. So yes, I do have to be careful, but it's like she's afraid of me living life. I went to an anime convention 3 hours away and she was texting me the minute I was out of town. When I eventually am able to afford to move out, I know it'll be an argument. Story 65. Having incredibly strict parents. It quickly instills in you that the world is a very dangerous place when you aren't allowed over to any friend's house out of fear something bad might happen. It's desperately isolating to not have any friends due to being underdeveloped socially and knowing they won't be able to hang out with you anyway. Story 66. Having an anal fissure, being constipated, but the doctor gave you some really good laxatives to soften things up. The feeling of a giant boulder being squeezed through a cave by the pressure of a rushing river. I don't think I've ever felt less in control in my life. Story 67. Something always overlooked or underestimated is getting made fun of in middle high school. The point where it isn't physical bullying, but people call you ugly behind your back. People ask you out as a joke, etc. It sounds so simple, but it can someone up badly in the head and ruin future relationships. To this day, I still always think someone is lying when they say they are interested in me. Story 68. Verbal and emotional abuse. If a parent physically abuses their kid, then everybody is up in arms and child services is ready to take the kid out of that parent's custody in the blink of an eye. If a parent verbally and emotionally abuses their child, people care a lot less because they can't see the scars and say things like, "It's just words." I'd rather have a parent that was physically abusive, but know that they loved me, than a parent who didn't give a damn about me and considered me worthless and belittled me at every opportunity. Studies have shown that kids who are verbally and emotionally abused are far more likely to suffer from depression, join gangs, and commit than kids who are physically abused. Story 69. Teasing that's really bullying, not fitting in at school. We all know that beating people up is bad or horrible pranks are wrong, but it doesn't even have to be that egregious and can still have a real impact on people as adults. Even if it seems normal or minor to an adult, those feelings of rejection, humiliation, loneliness, etc. can have a real impact into adulthood. Story 70. Psychotherapy leaves already vulnerable individuals feeling exposed and burdened by significant costs. Despite being presented as a science, psychology often relies on subjective ideas rather than solid evidence, which leaves ample room for mistakes. Psychology often misuses statistics, leading to misleading conclusions due to small sample sizes, biases, selective reporting, and the inability to replicate studies. Although diagnostic methods must meet strict requirements, the therapist's personality, experience, and attitude can strongly influence the outcome, to the extent that visiting a different therapist results in a completely different diagnosis. Finally, there are no real avenues for support and potential legal assistance when someone has been harmed during therapy. Most cases, other than SA, are swept under the carpet with ridiculously negligible consequences for the therapist. Story 71. Going through a natural disaster. Live at ground zero of Helene in WNC last fall. My wife and I used to love visiting the river and love the sound of the wind and rain during a storm. Now we can't be near the rivers without just feeling dread, and any amount of wind and rain makes us anxious. Story 72. I lost my daughter suddenly at the age of 26. It's always been my greatest fear that something would happen to one of my children. Most people do realize it's the worst thing that could happen to anyone. The feeling is inexplicably excruciating pain at every level. I think what I was paralyzed by was absolute terror. I couldn't catch my breath or form complete sentences. I couldn't look at anyone in the eye because I thought they would see or feel my pain and it would either hurt or kill them. I went to a local Dollar Tree for no reason and walked around in circles shaking but trying to figure out how to act normal. The harder I tried to blend, the more I stood out. I was accused of stealing by a woman who worked there and actually called the police, and I gave consent to the request of allowing them to search me. I was not able to comprehend why or what was happening. I didn't really care because it seemed so trivial and mundane. I was a little bit annoyed by the boredom and having to hold still for what seemed like 6 hours, but was only about 45 minutes. I couldn't think. I was in so much pain I could barely walk. Story 73. Divorce. even amicable. My parents divorced when I was 12. Very amicable. My parents are still close. Lunch together, dealing with 3 adult children, make my dad drill holes in the wall for me, but a 12-year-old doesn't know what a 30-something, know in retrospect. I'm so grateful and happy for my parents, but 12-yo me was quite sad, I think, and it may have affected the way I deal with relationships. Story 74. Had a horrible boss for 4 years. She berated me in front of the other staff, would spend closed-door meetings with me yelling that I knew I was terrible at my job and needed to resign. I had just lost my mother, and she yelled at me to get over it. So I developed 2 strategies. The first was to answer every question with a very fast yes. That's what she wanted to hear, and as a terrible manager, she never followed up. The second was something that preserved my sanity on bad days. I tuned her out and went to a happy place in my mind, playing with a basket of puppies. No lie, I did that. Looking back, I can see that I was on the precipice of emotional collapse. Having her yell at me about what the heck did I have to smile about while I was happily playing with my imaginary puppies just drove her nuts. After a year of this, she decided to punish me by taking away my office and sending me to a building far away from my colleagues to share a small space with 3 others. And it was awesome. Over the next 3 years, she stopped by twice. I was so much happier. Happy ending. Her poor management and dismal financials caught up with her, and she was fired. And get this, she sought me out to be her sympathetic friend, that she always felt a special bond with me. And I happily retired with 20 years of service and a nice pension. Story 75. Being diagnosed with cancer at 20, again, with a different diagnosis at 27. Having a partner who's an addict while you start cancer treatment. I will never not feel completely alone when I think about how alone I was when that happened. This was my turning point for getting out, though. Infertility. Working in healthcare, not a single Mother's Day or holiday has passed where some random, well-meaning old person asks about kids. It used to make me cry, and now I use the cancer card and just feel destroyed inside. Story 76. Losing a pregnancy, especially after 12 weeks. Some people react with, you could just have another, but it isn't like that. You've lost a child you were hoping, expecting to meet. You felt move inside of you. It affects you in ways you did not expect, even when you are doing very well considering the circumstances and you are mostly okay after. Story 77. Having a baby in the NICU. It's torture leaving your newborn for weeks to months, having to ask to hold them or care for them, and the guilt that you or your body failed them and that it's all your fault. The NICU feels like this weird bubble of hell that I still have nightmares about, even though my son's been home for months and is a happy, healthy guy who nobody would be able to tell he was early. Story 78. Involuntary hospital stays with no visitors. I'm not just talking about psychiatric sections or holds. I'm talking about the stays where you're very medically unwell, so you cannot leave. Sometimes even the bed, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the sounds, the smells, the dependence on others, the utter boredom, the deep need to get back to home comforts. The list goes on, but I'll get pulled back in. Story 79. Emotional abuse. It never feels like enough to say what the other person did, to the point where you wish it was physical for proof and then feel bad for thinking that. On top of dealing with the abuse, you question everything you've ever experienced, especially the bad memories, and wonder if you are overreacting. Took me years of therapy and medication to accept. Story 80. Mental illness since early childhood. I suffered from anxiety since I was around 10. I was always an anxious child, but then it turned into a real problem. Anxiety turned to depression in high school. I'm 23 and just now started antidepressants. I can believe some people feel this happy, motivated, and good all the time. I lost so much to mental problems, my childhood, friendships, relationships, experiences, etc. I hate how people say that childhood and university is the best part of life because I was miserable. Even my therapist joked about it. Wait till you get a job. Oh, so I can be even more miserable? What's the point then? Was close to calling it quits, but antidepressants were life-changing. Story 81. Head lice. My parents verbally abused and neglected my sister and I, and we constantly had lice. I remember we would be lined up for lice checks at school, and I would be silently panicking, waiting in line for the school nurse to check my hair. They would always find the lice. The kids would tease me. Then the school would call my mom to come pick us up. She and my stepdad always got mad at us for having lice and said we must have shared brushes with someone to get it. Only then would she do a treatment or two, but we would have to go through our hair with the lice combs. They never really left completely, and for years my hair crawled with lice. Just typing this out makes me feel panicky. I remember pulling them out of my hair, my scalp always itching. I have no idea how, but they finally went away once I got into high school. I'm still traumatized by it and obsessively keep my hair up, and if I hear that anyone has lice, I get very triggered and panicky. Story 82, Infertility and IVF. You can handle the physical stuff, like the testing, injections, procedures, and in my case, exploratory abdominal surgery. I mean, it's not fun, but you suck it up and do it. But the mental side, receiving bad news after bad news after bad news with no end in sight is so much worse. Then add in everyone else around you falling pregnant, some accidentally, with everyone asking you when you'll start a family. If you haven't been through it yourself, you can't fully know, and you can be grateful for that. But if you do know, you're not alone in this. Story 83, Sleep deprivation and repetitive noise. I had horrible neighbors that played instruments loudly enough to vibrate the photos off of my walls 5 nights a week from 5 p.m. until 4 a.m. On weekdays, I had to be up at 6 a.m. for work. They absolutely refused to stop playing when I asked nicely. I made many noise complaints, and they were never taken seriously. This was years ago, and if I hear that style of music in the distance or heavy bass, I get a feeling of dread and panic. As soon as it started, I knew my night and most of the next day was ruined. They had no pattern to predict which day they were going to play, so it could happen at any time, and it could be multiple days in a row of sleep deprivation. Story 84. Having an undiagnosed learning disability as a child and being diagnosed as an adult. I spent my whole childhood hearing, "You're not living up to your potential. You'd be so successful if you just tried, just focus, just clean up your desk. It's not that hard. Everyone else can do it. Why can't you?" I was trying. I was focusing. I tried my hardest to stay organized, to complete all my work on time, to study, to pay attention in class, to finish the things I started. And none of it was enough, so clearly it had to be my fault. I must not have been trying enough, must not have focused hard enough, must not care like everyone says. It must be me. I am bad and wrong and lazy and unworthy of the people I love who I keep disappointing. The constant feeling of not being good enough turned into anxiety and depression and eventually self-harm. I would sit on the floor of my room sobbing, feeling like I had to rip my skin off from frustration, asking myself why I couldn't just write the essay, do the project, clean my room. Eventually, I learned that cutting myself made me calm enough to sit down and work for a few hours. So I cut myself almost every day from 12 through college because I wanted to live up to my potential even if it killed me. When I was diagnosed in my late 20s, I went through an actual mourning period for the kid I had been. Full 5 stages of grief. There are a lot of things in my life that would have been different if I had gotten the help I needed. There's a lot of pain of all different types I think I would have avoided. Story 85. Living with a health condition that radically alters your appearance. Something that visibly repulses others, but managing to conceal it through painstaking effort, like hours of fixing it, or layers of clothing, strategic hairstyling, or carefully applied makeup. You pass, but only barely. And so you live in constant fear of being exposed, of someone seeing too much, or catching you off guard and recoiling. Story 86. Growing up in a toxic environment. People that grew up in toxic and unhealthy environments find comfort in them and unknowingly seek them out. Even when you swear you know all the warning signs and will never fall into that trap again, you still do. When you finally find a healthy relationship, you feel terrified, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Or a lot of people feel bored because they aren't used to something stable. They're used to the roller coaster and don't know how to function without it. You gain all these survival instincts as a child you don't know what to do with in a healthy environment. Story 87. Being bullied. Even 10 years later, I'm suffering from low self-esteem, fear of other people judging me and talking behind my back. Can't take compliments at all. Have a hard time trusting people. Always looking for evidence that I'm not as useless as I think. The list goes on. Diagnosed with a condition caused by the trauma of the bullying. Losing a grandparent. People who were never close to theirs or didn't know theirs don't understand. Society has this attitude of, well, they're old, of course they're going to die. Get over it. It's a joke in college that you have 4 grandparents who you can kill off as excuses for getting extensions on assignments. I lost my grandfather while I was in college and just went through the loss of my grandmother, who was honestly one of my best friends. She's been there my entire life, and now she's just not. I feel self-conscious bringing it up, though, because people are dismissive. Similarly, losing a pet, that is real. They're a family member. Story 89. Being forcibly tickled when you're a kid who can't convince the adults around you that yes, you really do hate it, and yes, when you're saying no, you mean it. I just have memories of being chased down and held down and forced into doing this thing that felt like nails on a chalkboard to me because nobody would understand that I was running away from it for real, not as a game. Story 90. Life in general. Every part of it is trauma response. Burn yourself on the kettle. Trauma. Say hi and they don't hear you? Trauma. The Buddhists had it right. Life is suffering. It's full of uncomfortability and pain. You can't go through it without stubbing your toe. To feel is to feel pain. That in mind, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Story 91. One thing that can be more traumatizing than people realize is experiencing long-term uncertainty, like living in a state of legal limbo or waiting for decisions that could drastically change your life. The constant stress and feeling of powerlessness can take a heavy toll on mental health over time. Story 92. Being chronically ill and having nobody around you believe that you actually are. I mask it well, but I live in constant pain. I hear things like, well, maybe if you drank more water and ate fruit, you'd feel fine on a daily basis. It's a total mindfuck and so invalidating that I sometimes convince myself that maybe it is all in my head. Story 93. Having someone break into your home, even if you're not there when it happens. Your home is your sanctuary, your safe place away from the outside world. So to have it infiltrated by a stranger can be as close to being personally violated without your body involved. Even if the intruder gets caught and arrested, it doesn't matter. Your home no longer feels like your home or any kind of safe place. Story 94. Having alcoholic parents. Going in public with them while they were drunk was a nightmare, especially if they were fighting. I still remember being at a fair and my dad spitting in my mom's face and dragging me away from her while I screamed trying to go back to her. I remember people stepping back and staring at us. Story 95. Bad neighbors. Lived next to a lady with severe mental health issues. Something like a psychosis. She would yell and scream about the police and feds, throw her furniture outside, wreck her apartment, harass other neighbors, etc. Police came several times, but couldn't do anything really. Took her in once, but she came back a couple of hours later. She ultimately left, fled for the feds that were after her and facing eviction as she didn't pay rent. And we also moved elsewhere, but my heart rate still goes up when I hear my current, perfectly fine and quiet neighbors. It sucks feeling unsafe at home. Story 96. Being in a minor, not lethal, injury-inducing crash. Currently 1 a.m. My sleep was already messed up. But around 5 p.m. the evening prior, GF was driving, and I'm passenger, we're laughing, and next thing we know, I see the car in front brake, and we don't stop in time. Call me bad luck. But my car had just been damaged pretty bad by a guy cutting 3 lanes slow speed no-go whiplash. But this crash this evening, I caught airtime. Thank God I had my seatbelt and everything slowed down. I cannot remember exactly what I saw or felt, but man shirt when the adrenaline wore down and feeling it can feel the tightness in my neck and headache and nausea. Wouldn't be surprised if I have a minor concussion. Was due to fly the next morning for my cousin's graduation, but I'm actually scared to fly after being in a crash 2 days in a row. So current at a rest stop, Dad is driving me in the pickup, so at least I feel safe up here. Story 97. Working as an infection preventionist during COVID. We were in charge of keeping patients and employees safe throughout the multiple quick pivots that the CDC and federal entities and local health jurisdictions were handing out. We had to develop policy and reconfigure the same edicts over and over while attempting to provide substandard resources that we were all fighting over. PPE, hand sanitizer, basic supplies. We had to soothe and educate and at times enforce policy for people with constant threats to their psychological and bodily safety. The efforts during the entire breadth of the pandemic were met by folks denying efficacy of interventions or demanding swift response. We clung to other IPs and infectious disease providers. The constant shifting of my personal resource to meet the needs of the various audiences I served was likely the closest I will ever come to anything near code switching, and my heart aches for folks in minority and underrepresented groups who have to live that exhaustion just to have to survive on a daily basis. Though board certified, I can't bring myself to practice any longer. Story 98, Covert Abuse. I grew up being abused in this way, so this is just my take on it. Story 99, Being the Mature Kid Growing Up. People praise you for handling things well, but what they don't see is the emotional neglect, suppressed feelings, and the way it trains you to never ask for help even when you're drowning. Story 11, Being put down for your weight when you're little. When friends do it, it's bad. When the opposite gender does it, it's worse. But when parents do it, it's the worst. I'm 25 now and kind of obsessed with fitness. I weigh everything I eat to the gram. Not complaining, I don't get depressed anymore, but I feel that my body image issues are ingrained for life. Story 13, Social media. Yes, you've read about it, but do you really know or believe that? I'm 56 and I can see the difference of people who grew up with it as others like me who did not. You've been trained to avoid any long-form news since it's boring if it's over 30 seconds long. Story 14, American culture.